And hello from the campus of Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We welcome you to today's discussion on DevSecOps implementation in the DoD, barriers and enablers. My name is Shane McGraw. I'll be your audience moderator for today's discussion, and I'd like to thank you for attending. We want to make today as interactive as possible, so we will take questions throughout the discussion and again at the close of the discussion. And you can submit those questions on the chat tab on the player interface. And now I'd like to introduce Hassan Yassar. Hassan's a manager here at DSCI, and he's going to be the panel moderator, and we'll introduce the rest of our panelists and kind of kick off the discussion. Hassan, all yours.
Thanks, Shane. So on my right-hand side, Eileen Rubel, and she's an Agile team lead from SCI SSD. And Jeff Bowling, and he's a special assistant to software acquisition on DoD. And Jeff was a former SCI employee, but it's nice to have you here, Jeff. And Nicholas Shallon, and he is on the phone, and he's a special advisor for cloud security and DevSecOps. So it's a really great discussion that we can start. And I'm keep hearing a lot of DevSecOps word almost everywhere, including DoD. So today's topic is really will discuss about what enablers and barriers are, how can we implement it. So before that, diving, so I would like to really understand what DevSecOps means. So what do you think about Nick, about what is DevSecOps? I'm sure you're hearing a lot. Can I hear your definition what DevSecOps mean, Nick?
Yeah, sure. So good afternoon, everybody. First, to talk about DevSecOps, I think we all think of Agile methodologies, and I see that as an evolution of Agile. And really, one of the biggest impact is really on the automation side of the development, the dev side of it, the security side, the tech side of it, and the IT operations side of it with ops, DevSecOps, right? To automate and streamline the software development lifecycle and delivering features, fixes, updates rapidly, and enabling teams to do rapid prototyping and A/B testing and all the stuff we need to do to deliver software better and faster.
Thanks, Jeff. So let's continue the next one. Jeff, can you list the common principles and techniques for DevSecOps factory concept? What are the common ideas, like in technical detail or the...
Sure. I'll tell you my own bias,
right,
which is not going to be universally agreed upon probably, but one, it's building on Agile principles a little bit or a lot, where continuous integration, continuous delivery, I think that's an important principle for DevOps and DevSecOps. I'm bullish, I've always been bullish on maximal, as much automation as you can get in the tool chain as possible. So automated tests, automated code scanning. I think all of it's the old adage about when do you automate, when it's dull, dangerous, or dirty. And there's a lot of dull practices in software development, like manually running the same tests over and over again. We can automate that. We tend to have ignored our own needs, our own automation needs a lot. So CICD, moving quickly, close feedback from the customer always, maximal automation, and the other one is it doesn't end for DevSecOps. It doesn't end once you release the code. I'm also very bullish or very big on instrumenting your code and instrumenting your runtime system. And we actually have some technologies nowadays, maybe Nick will talk more about this later, about that if we orchestrate our solutions using container-based technology, we can put sidecar containers on things and instrument systems that weren't even built for instrumentation, for instance, right? So I think what you do with your system in operations, the ops side of DevSecOps, is as important as to how it's developed. Is continuous monitoring during runtime, so that you can do things like know what normal looks like, maybe know which features get used more often than not, maybe how you might need to refactor, and then also you can, if you're monitoring properly, you can perhaps be more resilient in operations and better respond to either catastrophes that you didn't plan for or even malicious cyber activity.
Actually, you said a really key word, like plan something which is coming up, you don't know what will come up.
Right.
So I'm going to go back to the definition of what Nick said is a DevSecOps related to what you describe as the common practices. So you think the DevSecOps is giving a chance for the security perspective, so we'll be ready for future if something comes up, because we may not able to secure everything at this moment, but we should be ready for future. You believe that the concept of the infrastructure piece is an example?
I do. One of the things, and we talked about it earlier today, that I think there's inherent security in speed, in the ability to rapidly release new versions and to be responsive to how your system's working in operation, and to be able to, if you notice something you hadn't planned for, you notice an unforeseen event, but you can quickly, if your design accommodates it and your developers can accommodate it, if you can quickly implement a change or a fix that addresses that problem and get it quickly to production, I think there's inherent security just in the ability to have that kind of responsive action with your development pipeline and your developers. Did that answer your question? I don't know if that answered your question.
So I'm listening to common principle, which you described automation. So I'm going to go back to the Nick for you before we get the next question. Nick, what do you think about automation of every security practices? Any idea how can we automate every security controller like RMF? What is your take on the RMF and the DevSecOps?
Yeah, I think this is very important, a very important part of DevSecOps. I think it's more than just automating compliance, right? Compliance as code. You can see a lot of effort online on different groups, open source groups, working on automation of the NIST mapping and trying to detect gaps from a compliance standpoint. But like Jeff mentioned, right, the cycle side for us, at least within DoD, is very important to get this runtime visibility. I think when you think cyber, when you look at DevSecOps, for me the big difference between DevOps and DevSecOps is not just, hey, we're going to do some static dynamic analysis on your code. That's a given. That's already part of most DevOps pipeline. It's really on the runtime side with both container behavior and CVE detection at build inside the registry and also in runtime. So that's kind of the key focus. So to automate RMF, I think you have multiple options. The issue is often the layers you have to deal with between your infrastructure as a service, your PaaS, and then your application, and sometimes even like Kubernetes and other layers you have to deal with. So that could be compounding the compliance requirements because you're inheriting from cloud and PaaS, but it doesn't mean that you still don't have some mitigation to do at your application layer. So that's really what I'm trying to automate, is the detection of various layers and then automatically define what's left to do for the application layer.
Yeah, interesting. I just want to add one thing is, if we actually get to the point where we're monitoring very effectively, then we can start to automate some of the responses. I'm not going to say we should automate all of our cyber responses, but I think many of them we can automate. So that'll lead to more resilient software as well. And I would love to get DoD to the point where we use chaos engineering and we randomly can take stuff down and the mission doesn't fail. I would love that. I think we're a long ways from that, but
because we're in a different domain, we may not be able to get the fail on the field. We cannot. We have to be ready if something goes wrong.
Yeah. So I'd love to be able to do that and literally do chaos monkey and simian army stuff during military exercises to our IT infrastructure, to our running services, and see what happens.
Or maybe we can take that concept running in the staging environment as much as we can in detail, so we will be ready for the future.
Yeah.
So you brought actually a good point, Nick and Jeff, and now I see that more the customer feedback. You mentioned about the customer feedback, which is the feedback from actual operation and environment.
Yep.
So I believe that the DevSecOps concept will give us feedback directly from the running environment, that we can see the containers and feeding, or the result of the running container feeding back to the CICD pipeline. So what are you guys thinking about getting a security controllers in place? Do you see any automation techniques or ideas? Because we usually cover up more the vulnerability analysis at the end as part of CI and CD, which we are getting a runtime analysis as on the production environment. So how can I tie that pieces into my security requirements? You want to take any time?
I'm going to make sure I understand the question.
The security controllers I listed as my requirements. How I can map the security controllers back to the container analysis or vulnerability analysis I do. Which is RMF controllers we do.
Yeah. I got to think about it. Nick, you want to go first, then I'll try to jump in? Eileen, you want to jump in?
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one. I think, to really think of what I would really recommend is that level of automation and baked-in security inside the container itself, right? I think a lot of people don't realize that the tools we usually use to monitor and get telemetry from VMs will not actually be able to see what's going on inside containers. And so I think one of the big thing is really the ability to automate that container security stack. And then a lot of these tools, and there's a few tools out there like, Twistlock, Encore, Aqua, and others there. A few of these can do things differently and actually have baked-in STIGs, baked-in NIST 853 controls that can then detect what's going on inside the container. But again, even if the container is compliant, it doesn't mean the application inside a container will be compliant as well. So there's all the layers we need to keep in mind. It's not as easy as a yes or no checkbox. And I think a lot of products usually scan a VM or a container and tell you if you're compliant or not, and that's not always truly the case. So something to keep in mind.
One of the things I'm anxious to get to the point of, which we're not there yet, but we're getting closer. As we move workloads, we re-engineer workloads, move into the cloud, and we instrument them properly. I want us to get to the point where we can actually continuously monitor them and understand what normal really looks like. I mean, to understand deviation from normal, first you have to understand normal, and sometimes that's actually hard to define. I mean, I used to think I was normal, but I'm not. But I actually think though there are some machine learning techniques like reinforcement learning and inverse reinforcement learning that if we get the right telemetry data out of our running workloads, then those tools may be able to help us understand things that are outside the bounds of what they were intended to be used for.
Great. So these are the great advantage of having a DevSecOps. We discuss about like automation, traceability, metrics, and data metric collection. These are great stuff. Let's talk about the challenges. I'm going to start with Eileen. What are typical challenges to adapt to modern software practices in DoD? What do you see the challenges are?
So
you've seen a lot of challenges, right?
I have.
You've worked with a lot of programs from DoD, right? So yeah,
right. We've worked with a lot of programs, everything from defense business systems to what the DIB is referring to as type D software. Right?
Yeah. Custom software and custom hardware.
Software and custom hardware. Complex cyber physical systems. And the bulk of our work in our team has been focused on the ecosystem that enables us to take advantage of these tools and techniques. So largely working with defense and federal government program offices that are partnering with engineering organizations to acquire or develop software-enabled capability. And the kinds of barriers that we see in the environment, and you and I talk a lot about collaboration being a fundamental underpinning of both DevOps and Agile. And the types of barriers that we see, there's a lot of procedural and functional barriers and cultural barriers associated with getting your head around the idea of, okay, what does it mean to release code very rapidly into the field when we've got things like getting authority to operate, when we don't understand, we don't have contracts that are set up to require that we get capability drops or that we have the type of insight that we need because it's the contract was written 5 years ago. We also deal a lot with legacy code bases. And what does DevSecOps mean if I'm maintaining a 25-year-old code base on obsolete hardware, and I have to work really, really hard to find people that know those technologies and sort of pull those ideas forward. We very rarely find ourselves with the luxury of working from a green field. And so things like acquisition processes, how do we write contracts to ensure that we're getting to ensure that we have parity across environments? How do we write contracts to make sure that we are getting entire build environments and that we understand that we have the correct data rights associated with the capability so that we own the technical baseline going forward? Dealing with things like even things like the finances, even things like the accounting, right? How we appropriate funds. There's all sorts of interesting things coming out of the DIB swap study recently about that. But all of those, the way we used to do business in this very sequential kind of approach, those are the kinds of barriers that we still see and chip away at a little bit at a time. So even as we're working on the on the technical infrastructure pieces of the problem, the rest of the ecosystem also still needs to be optimized for widespread adoption.
Mm-hmm. Anything other one of the challenges, Jeff?
Oh yeah, I was just taking some notes.
I'm going to turn it to you.
Yeah, I actually, one of the things that still astounds me is just awareness for government program managers and government program offices, the awareness that there are actually people in the world that are good at software. And there's tons of people that are good at software. The DoD is so used to getting bad software that's over budget, that's late, that doesn't meet requirements, or, you know what I mean? Just the awareness that it can be massively better than it has been is one of them. Another one is accessibility, and when I say that, I mean like accessibility to world-class tools, accessibility to cloud infrastructure. It's still really hard for the government to buy cloud right now. Well, there's a couple of things that keep us from. We can't actually buy it on demand. The government can't. We don't want to trip the Anti-Deficiency Act, so we have to work these interesting contract backflips to have somebody else buy our cloud for us on demand, but we just pay them a lump sum of money, and if we don't use it all, we usually still pay the bill. There's another piece which is, I don't know how to use this. This is going to be, we'll probably get the most flare up on the question channel from this, but actually I'm going to lead into this one softly. The awareness piece is, another one of that is, there's massive goodness in open source software. And the government and our industrial base have traditionally really been, for security reasons or whatever reasons, kind of anti-open source, or it's got to meet like a higher bar. Just because we pay company X for a pre-compiled binary, we somehow think that's either more secure or better or safer, rather than actually downloading the code ourselves and building it ourselves, and having the ability to inspect that and even run independent audits. I think we've got to get over that and get over the fact that an awful lot of DevOps tools, DevSecOps tools, are open source, and we've got to be able to benefit from those. We've got to be able to run Kubernetes in our clouds. You know what I mean? We've got to be able to run Istio. I think we have to be able to do some of those things. Which leads me to my other one is this whole, and this, I'm going to sound like I'm an old man now. I'm raging at the they have this whole not invented here syndrome. A lot of developers have sort of technical pride or technical arrogance, where I was visiting a program recently where I always believe that you should look and adopt an existing solution if it can meet your needs before you build it yourself. I mean, and there's so much great open source nowadays, and there's so much great commercial software nowadays. The vast majority of things, a lot of software development nowadays really should be, sort of rip, mix, burn, if you're familiar with that from Free Culture. Where you take the best of things and you put them together and suit your use case. And there's not a ton of actual, old school programming going on there, and we have trouble with that. One of the programs I was talking to, they needed a message bus capability or capability between running services, and they evaluated DDS, which is I think world class messaging capability, and they're like, oh, it was too complicated for us, so we just wrote it ourselves. And I'm thinking to myself, you just created yourself a maintenance nightmare, a testing nightmare. You know what I mean? And there's RabbitMQ, there's tons of messaging buses out there or messaging libraries out there that you could look at, and I bet you most of them would have solved their needs just perfectly if they would have adopted it.
On the acquisition side, we talk a lot about, fostering competition and avoiding being locked into certain vendors, and building everything yourself is like as far right on the vendor lock continuum.
Absolutely,
as you can get, right?
yeah. And when we incentivize probably badly, our contracts incentivize them, some of our industrial base, to build it themselves, so that we need them to maintain it, and we've got to find a way out of that one, and we're working on it. I think we have approaches to help break out of that as well.
I see many challenges. Nick, do you want another challenges? Otherwise, I will get from audience, because we know the challenges. Oh yeah, to do this properly.
It's easier. It's easiest to complain about stuff rather than offer solutions.
Yeah, so I think the number one for me, I think that people, I feel like discount too easily is a technology stack. I think people always mention culture issues and things like that, which I understand are critical in DoD, but I don't think people really understand the volume of the stack necessary for DevSecOps, a true DevSecOps pipeline, all the tools you're going to need to use. And also I feel like, they misunderstand that setting up the CICD pipeline is not the end of the journey to take a monolithic application into microservices, and how do you cut it, domain-driven design, and also what it takes to set up a microservice architecture, looking at things like Istio and your service mesh and east and west traffic, and the cyber side of the house is getting even more complex when you're moving to function as a service and Knative and things like that, where you're going to need to deal with messaging and role-based asset control across all the stack between your legacy VMs, your containers, and maybe some of your function as a service stack. And all that needs to be orchestrated, highly available, have the proper orchestration, routing, A/B testing, canary release, you name it. And first, not only a lot of people still don't even know what Knative and function as a service is, or something like A/B testing and canary release, and that's just scary to me, because we don't know how to get feedback from the end user, and people don't also realize the difference between logs and telemetry. And for me, telemetry is really there to give you the insights to understand how your application is performing and where your users are stopping or struggling with your application, so you can make decisions when you actually have multiple versions in production, where you actually see how users are performing and how you can make things better. I think many times in the federal government, we have just one version that's in production, and you just can't get feedback or try things out to get that feedback. So we end up doing user acceptance testing with 2 or 3 or 5, 10 users, which is just not the way the commercial side is doing its testing, right? You don't see, Tesla or Facebook or Netflix call you and ask you, hey, do you like that feature, right? It's all done through telemetry, and that's the beauty of having access to your operations and see that kind of data, so you can make the decision. So that's,
great. So
that's a few.
Yeah, I got so many challenges. I know I'm getting scared. Can we do all these things or not? Because we talk about so much greatness of DevSecOps and benefits. So before diving into any resolution or how can we solve this challenge, Shane, any questions?
Yeah, we had a question from Peter that was relevant to this section. With the Air Force going to cloud management with existing systems, do you see the security obligation being on the cloud carriers?
I'll take that initially. I think there's certainly a security obligation on the cloud carriers. I think we need to express that in terms of a service level agreement, right? I mean, they need to do their due diligence, securing their data centers and providing the right, keeping their platform software up to date. Whatever we're buying, however high level, if we're buying infrastructure from them or we're buying or platform as a service or even software as a service, they definitely have an obligation for that security. But I mean, ultimately, the responsibility of secure software rests on the mission owner, and that's something I want us to be able to have a language where developers can more effectively communicate the risk and the level of security that's in their running system, so that mission owners can make more well-informed decisions on whether or not they want to accept the risk or not. Because ultimately, it is up to the mission owner to do that. So
I guess the cloud platform should share what type of security controllers are available, so mission owners will take an advantage, be owner of that overall application on the cloud environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so see, transparency goes a long way there too. And
that's right.
And this is a tricky subject when, like, I'm sure most cloud providers don't want to open up the number of breaches they've had. For instance, I mean, of course they'll always say that they get this many border scans, or you know what I mean. They get millions and millions of border scans a minute on all these ports. Sure, that's like background radiation, right, on the internet. Right. So what's more important is how many times people successfully get through. And I think I would love to see the transparency and the sharing at that level too, because I guarantee none of them are perfect.
That's true. That's true.
Some might claim it, but I guarantee none of them are perfect. But we just have to live up to it so that we can do something about it.
Right. And Nick, anything else? Do you want to edit that topic?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest mistakes we make in the government is the FedRAMP authorization process, right, which is pretty slow and takes a long time for both infrastructure as a service partners, platform as a service partners, and software as a service partners. I think it makes a lot of sense for anything that's not software as a service. I think we just can't keep up with software as a service, and it's just too cumbersome for those companies to work with the government. But really, I think the biggest issue we have, even at the infrastructure layer with FedRAMP, is that the mission owners don't realize that it's not because they are compliant with NIST 853 and FedRAMP that it means there's nothing left for them to do on their layers, on the application layer, or whatever other layers they're using in terms of Kubernetes cluster, platform as a service like Google Container Service or OpenShift. And quite honestly, I think we just think of compliance and not really of security. And my job is really to focus on security and not so much on compliance.
If you're actually secure, compliance should come easily.
Yeah.
If you chase compliance, that doesn't mean you're secure always.
Right.
That's
a good point, actually. So now, before diving the challenge, the resolution or fixing any this type of challenges, any other questions we have, Shane?
Yeah, one from Dennis just came and asking that the DevOps CI/CD pipeline produces a lot of app context. For example, JSON calls in Swagger feeds. How far are we from using intentional context to automate whitelist security policy in DevSecOps?
So I can answer some of them, and after I answer,
I want Hassan take that one first.
So ideally, if we have a good policies is being generated, DevSecOps pipeline should really help us to share that information, even let's say if it's a JSON format, which is one of the principles of DevSecOps is requiring integration, like integration of the pipeline. If my pipeline is integrated, if I'm generating any app-specific context of data, I should feedback data goes back to the compliance checkers if I have anything else. If I have a security checker, that's the way we can get app data goes back to our requirements, which is the telemetry, which he mentioned a couple of minutes ago. That's the way we can connect the data throughout the pipeline, which is application generating and also tool stack is generating. That's the way we can connect the dots and make sure that policy is in place.
Did I hear, I don't know if I understood the question right, did I hear looking at the context of running software to do automated things like whitelisting?
How far are we from using intentional context to automate whitelist security policy in DevSecOps?
I get nervous that question makes me nervous, only because I think in order to do it, we have to have identity management and our permissions figured out effectively, so that whatever data in the software context is causing a need for a whitelist is being run by who we know it's being run by, and they have the permission to do it. And I don't think we've got those two things licked either. I mean, I would love to have the fact that I'm an authenticated user with a certain level of permissions, and the actions that are happening in my application create a demand for an automated whitelist, and because we do need to be able to do automated provisioning, obviously, which is automated whitelisting is included in that. But to be able to do it on the fly, like based on the contextual data that's going back and forth, I think you're putting a lot of trust in your identity management and your permissions database, which I'm okay doing if we can demonstrate that we can do that well. I don't know that we've demonstrated we can do that well. And it also flies in the face a little bit of, we actually kind of want to encrypt most of that data that's in flight. So maybe we don't want to be able to pull a lot of context out of that because we want it to be opaque. Those are just, maybe I'm crazy.
No, actually, that's using the DevSecOps platform and getting application on top of it. We're looking for what type of platform I should have that makes me enable all these services. Mm-hmm. That's my take on it. Like we should really use any type of application on it. We should have any type of data collection mechanisms using the right software development practices.
Yeah.
Right. So we're going to dive we have almost 30 minutes left. We're kind of past it. Let's talk about how can we resolve or fix that challenges. What our enablers are. Let's start from the awareness and the process-wise. What do you think about Eileen for addressing some challenges for cultural aspect of it and acquisition? We can talk after that.
So to sort of bump off what Jeff said earlier about speed being something that helps you inherently inherently develops security and resiliency. The idea that we have to keep everyone understanding is that your ability to be responsive is a strategic advantage in and of itself. Your ability to sort of shift direction has value, and being able to exploit changes in the environment around you quickly is an advantage. And we've sort of seen a really significant shift in the DoD in the last few years about understanding that idea. And I think the next level is really pushing beyond awareness of these concepts and really pushing out into the workforce to give folks the real tools. And I'm not talking about tools in the sense of software development tools, but tools in the sense of whatever it is they need to do their job contextually. So is it our defense acquisition workforce? We need folks to understand when we're talking about the DevOps pipeline, we're talking about infrastructure as code. What is it in that gets you some business outcome that you were looking for on a program in terms of ownership of the technical baseline? What steps can you take? What things can we put out there to make available? There are a lot of proposed shifts, I think, in policy and regulation that will probably help us with that. But sort of fundamentally getting folks the tools they need to, a coworker of mine calls it, what do I do Monday? Right? What's the toolkit that we need to get our professionals in these various career fields to how do I go back to my job on Monday and understand what I can do to enable the platform that I contribute to take advantage of DevSecOps in order to achieve our mission and to align what I am doing to how we're building this out so that we can achieve our mission. I think a lot of it is there's a huge communication element, and that's awareness and contact and tools to build understanding so that people can employ these ideas in their day-to-day jobs in support of the mission.
Right. So you think about sharing is a great concept to pass these barriers, like sharing what they are doing, which is a cultural element?
Right. So we've got, I think Defense Acquisition University is working on their DevSecOps Academy. I know that we're building out a lot of communities of practice. There are a lot of labs and software factories standing up in the DoD and really getting folks getting that information sharing from practitioners, working shoulder to shoulder to talk more about what they're doing that's working well and what isn't working, but really figure out what is it in my job that I need to do in order to enable these changes to occur, and then giving folks those tools. I think that's what I'm seeing is making all of those things available to people, figuring out what they are, making them available so that we can put them in play.
Going to go to another challenge that you mentioned, Jeff, about
I had a
open
good answer
source.
on that one, too.
Yes, please. Take the answer, and then I'll ask another question.
I wanted to use a terrible analogy, because I love terrible analogies, is when people live under an authoritarian regime, they don't know how good it could be, right? In a lot of cases, historically, until they're shown that it doesn't have to be terrible, they don't ask for anything better. But we now have, 18 to 30-year-old people in the service that are living with terrible software, and they know better.
Yes.
They get awesome software on their iPhones and their Android phones. They get awesome software on their tablets and their desktops nowadays, and it's predictive. It does what they want. It tells them how 17 minutes to your next appointment, and you don't even fire up the map. You know what I mean? We actually have a user base that knows the alternative, and they're starting to demand. I feel sometimes like I'm trying to overthrow governments when I talk to users at PEOs, at program executive offices, and at project offices. I like to try to talk to the users, and I pull them aside. And I'm like, do you realize there's freedom and good software on the other side of the world that you could have if you would just demand it? You know what I mean? And so I think from an awareness standpoint, that's my thing about awareness is I think the users are finally demanding it, and we're fomenting revolution from that standpoint. And then another one about culture is it's one of the worst things you can do to a person is hire them to do a job and then not let them do that job.
Yes.
If they've got expertise in something and a passion for something, and you hire them to do that, and you don't give them the right tools and then let them do that. We hire developers and we don't let them develop. We make them do RMF answer RMF checklists.
Or they got to ask every single thing and wait for a verdict to come down.
Yeah, we hire UX designers, and we don't let them work with users and actually experiment and try that stuff. We've got to create the environment that allows the developers and the product owners and the UX folks, and we've got to create an environment that allows them to do the job that they're hired to do and empower them to do that. And it's amazing the results you get. So if you just let people do what you hire them to do and what they're passionate about.
Why are you not able to use the people, their job? Is it the policy, or is it the bureaucracy, or is it the culture? What is
all of the above, actually. All of the above. I'm sorry, we're tackling all of the above.
I mean, when we have this have traditionally had this sort of hierarchical approach where authority is way up here and implementation is way down in the bottom of the organization. And so we push decisions about design and implementation as far as we possibly can from the people who are doing the work. Yeah. And that's not how we fight wars. But that seems to historically have been how we acquire systems.
Yeah, and so that's an interesting point. It's about part of it is how we've traditionally handled requirements.
Yes.
Requirements are sort of big R requirements are kind of a holy thing that only certain organizations get to say, this is a requirement for that thing. And they're oftentimes not the person that has to use the thing. We've got to, whoever has to use the thing gets to decide how it looks and empower them to do that at very low levels, which means we need to take 17, 18, 19-year-old E2s and E3s and let them make decisions on major weapon system programs on how they have to use the thing. That's my input, and we need to trust that we can do that.
It's possible with the people. They have to change their mindset, I guess, to make that happen.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we give them weapons with live rounds and send them into harm's way, but we can't let them pick which icon is going to be used to represent the trash can in an application.
Or how old are the pilots that we put into aircraft, right? We trust them with that. We organize,
23,
train them,
24
and
years
equip them,
old,
and we trust them with this. So why don't we treat our software workforce professionally in the same way?
I got a key point, which is the trust.
Sorry, you picked it.
I'm picking that.
Yeah, you picked it a passionate thing.
And I'm just picking some keyword we have been really advertising a lot as an advantage of DevSecOps, DevOps, which is building a trust relationship. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's the way we can really build up the trust of developers are doing the right job, give the right information to the managers or the decision makers are seeing that that's a correct decision has been done based on the data, based on telemetry. That's the way we can go that channel. So another things we talk about the challenges, open source. And I'm going to go to Nick first. Okay. And what do you think about open source and why? How can we take an advantage of open source? I know it's really difficult. We are never able to get any advantage of it so far. How can we pass that barrier using open source libraries, Nick? What is your suggestion?
Well, I would say that you actually cannot do DevSecOps or DevOps today without the open source community. In fact, most products that you're going to be using are, coming from the open source community, and including plugins and libraries and pretty much the entire stack from, Jenkins to even, scanning technologies, plugins, all dependent on open source communities. You would not be able to orchestrate your stack, Istio, Service Mesh, same thing, open source product. So I understand that some people are still, unfortunately, for the U.S. government, worried about open source, and it's time for them to move to the 21st century. But we have actually much more visibility and better understanding of what's going on with open source software than we do when you just buy an off-the-shelf product that you don't have any access to the source code, and you actually cannot really truly see what's going on. So with all the tools that we actually leverage for CyberStack, between static dynamic analysis, funding and testing tools, and bit of materials, lifecycle tools, I think you can actually get a much better understanding of open source compared to compiled binaries that you can get from your vendor. So,
Jeff, anything else? Otherwise, I have another follow-up question. So, anything is blocking us not to use open source in DoD? Is there any policy that says no?
No, in fact, there's actually policy. There's written policy that encourages evaluation of open source as solutions. I think one of the things that historically challenges us is DoD operates their weapon systems for a really long time, and they never want to have a case where support for a necessary, like a required library, goes away. And open source projects come and go, and you know what I mean. But I would argue companies come and go. And if you and if you make the best decision you can about like OpenSSL,
Right.
it's been around for a long time. As a project, it's probably not going to go anywhere anytime soon. As an open source project, those kinds of things. Kubernetes is going to be around for a while, right? I'm okay if we bank on some of these things. So I think that's been one of the things is fear in a program manager to tie themselves to something that may not be here 10 or 12 or 15 years down the road. Or if it's not here, they want to have a legal entity to blame, like a company. In an open source world,
that's a good point.
They can't do that. And my thing is, with our software, one of the Defense Innovation Board's big mantras is software is never done, but it also continuously evolves, continuously refactor it. If you have code in your operational code base that's more than 5 or 8 years old, you need to massively look at that code and probably refactor it and continuously reevaluate the libraries you're using. So I think we should get to a point where we're developing our code effectively so we can. And it's designed well so that a library dependence, if a small open source project that we used for one capability goes away, we can easily incorporate something else and just keep rolling with it. That's where I'm at.
I think it's a psychological. Yes, Nick.
So I think you're exactly right. I think what you just described is, first, we shouldn't never get too dependent on any single libraries, and by building modular software and microservices, you actually should be able to replace things pretty quickly. Also, what's interesting is you see something like the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, CNCF, starting to exist, right? Which, Kubernetes becomes part of CNCF, and now you have a foundation supporting Kubernetes, so it's not going to, go away anytime soon because they are putting the resources behind it, and several companies are contributing to the community. And that's, I think, where the future of the big open source project will go. And that's, I think, what's going to mitigate that risk of something going away versus, quite honestly, a company that gets sold every day. Look at, Red Hat, for example, being sold to IBM this year, right? That's something that potentially could have scared a lot of people, even though it's going pretty well right now. But who knows what can happen in 2 years, 3 years. So at the end of the day, I think the answer is probably with a foundation system with open source, and also making sure you don't get vendor locked to any library or any product.
That's a good point, actually. You guys defined the perfect definition of bill of materials. If we know what we are getting into our life cycle as a component, we can keep maintaining it. The vendor does the similar things. Vendor is getting and using it, so that means we should know what we are getting it.
Yeah. If we just buy a binary,
right, we
have no idea what's in it. We have zero visibility into that binary. It's probably got some open source libraries in it. It's probably got what's the famous thing? Oh, I need to solve a problem. Let me go to Stack Overflow and copy and paste 10 lines of code. Probably got a bunch of that in there. You know what I mean? There was one of the bugs. Which one was it? There was a recent exploit that was. It was because there was a bug in the Intel documentation manual that was the reference implementation, and everybody just cut and pasted that code into their product. And so everybody's product had the same bug in it. And it was traceable back to some reference manual.
I feel that this is kind of like a modern software development practice. It's just copy and paste it.
Stack Overflow, baby.
Yeah, that's right.
I've done it myself.
Yep.
I'm guilty.
Yep. So let's talk about a little bit about how can we implement DevSecOps. So I'm going to start from Jeff. And where can we start if you're in a position advising a program to start DevSecOps? What do you advise? Where we can start implement DevSecOps?
Wow. So
I know it's long, but just give a very high level.
Sure. It sort of depends on the kind of program. Is the government going to be largely developing the code themselves or not? If the government's going to be developing the code, then I actually recommend going to an outside consulting expert that does DevSecOps well. There are companies out there. In fact, I called you several weeks ago and said, Hassan, I need a list of companies that does DevSecOps training that can help us stand things up. So I recommend going to an outside, asking for help from somebody else. You can learn this on your own. I mean, there's tons of great stuff on the web to learn this on your own, but you shouldn't have to if you've got budget to start up rapidly. The other one is partnering with a company that's already doing it. I think part of the success Kessel Run has had is they were able to get up and going very quickly because they partnered with a company like Pivotal Labs, that was really good at it and able to train their people more rapidly. I think that was a good way to go. Another way would be, I think we should, if the government's not going to develop the software themselves, but we are going to outsource the development, I think we need to look really hard at non-traditional defense industrial-based companies. Yeah. Companies that are actually good at software. Mm-hmm. I was toying with this idea. We're rewriting the 5000 series of regulations right now, and I was toying with this idea, with the acquisition regulations, of saying you're not allowed to buy software from a company that doesn't actually have a successful commercial software product. Not one that they've only sold to government, but has demonstrated that they actually can produce useful software that the general public wants. And I don't think that'll ever fly. But that's my point, is our traditional industrial-based companies, and I'll never get a job with any of them after I say this, but I've said this dozens of times already. Our traditional industrial-based companies have not demonstrated that they're good at software at scale. They just have not done that. But yet we go back to them time and again to buy our software. And I think we should look for an alternative, unless they demonstrate they can be better.
Got it. Nick, what's your position of implementing DevSecOps, where we should start? Like any steps that you can advise for the programs?
Well, assuming you got the talent, right, which is what Jeff was talking about, the training and the talent. You just can't just wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to stop doing DevSecOps today with zero training, right? You need to make that move from waterfall to agile and DevSecOps. And if you're still stuck at waterfall, hopefully you can jump all the way to DevSecOps and not be stuck in agile. And so for me, I think it comes to the tech again. I'm a tech guy, so I love tech. So I think, really helping in the adoption and making it as simple as possible for the developers, right? So if you bring them a service mesh, you bring them a CICD pipeline, and you make it easy for them to write microservices, they can focus on their mission and not actually build load balancing, high availability, containers, and having to figure out how to do A/B testing and routing and all the good stuff that your ECO service mesh will be able to do for you. And same thing for the testing side of the house and the cyber side of the house. If you bring them a CI/CD pipeline with all the tools for multiple programming languages like Java, Python, Go, C, C++, whatever you want to use, you facilitate adoption. And so because our entire infrastructure is based on top of CNCF Kubernetes and OCI compliant containers, we are hardening containers in DoD and creating a central repository of containers that anyone can come and use. And we're going to be supporting 100+ containers so people can not only stand up the CI/CD pipeline with the push of a button using Helm and Kubernetes, but also use containers for the application layers as well, like databases, API gateways, service mesh, and things like that.
So as a summary, we're expecting program manager or program, they will develop their own DevSecOps pipeline, working with a partner, and then taking advantage of the DoD is offering up centralized artifact catalog, which is a container, so we can help them to get the ATO process.
Yeah, and I would actually like, eventually, so I would like a lot of program managers to not have to develop their own pipeline, to have an enterprise level offering of several different kinds of pipelines. One's good for a business system, one's good for a safety critical system, one's good for one that's heavy in machine learning, and have some of these pipelines available. They can tweak them as they see fit, but we reinvent the wheel every time.
I agree.
There's this massive software project that is done out in the western part of the U.S. that they decided to build their own platform from scratch in 2012, rather than just look to the emerging cloud and capabilities that they had there. And so that they spent years and years and hundreds of millions of dollars reinventing a platform that they didn't have to invent, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. So we need to swallow our pride and use the stuff that's there.
Or using a cloud technologies as a baseline, adding a DevSecOps thought and process into the cloud environment and taking advantage of it. Because I'm going to challenge a bit on you, Jeff.
Sure.
There's no way we can get a one DevSecOps pipeline will work every program.
I completely agree.
Right.
Totally agree. Yeah, I completely agree with you.
It may change from architecture perspective. Mm-hmm. It may change for their tech stack. It may change eventually.
Yeah, I completely agree. And what we need to do is build an environment where it can continuously adapt and learn as change is needed. So because and the things that are hot today aren't going to be hot. There's something else out there, right? Yeah. What's after DevSecOps? I mean, we went from virtual machines. It took man, it took like a decade for DoD to figure out that virtualization was a good thing, right? And now containers are already almost passe, and we're at function as a service and serverless. You know what I mean?
Right.
And we're still talking about trying to get things containerized. You know, so yeah, what's the next thing on there? I don't know, but
It's going to be service architecture.
yeah.
It's going to be AI machine learning with respect to DevSecOps or DevOps, just calling it maybe AI apps or something else.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, but there's something out there, right?
That means we should be ready for continuously evaluate our environment, be ready
Yes.
for new changes.
Yes, and so that's where we need to get to, so that change doesn't frighten us so much, and we can keep up.
Great.
So,
So any question from
Yeah,
others?
so we had a comment from Daniel and a question. So I'll read the comment, let you guys just comment back, and then the question. So the comment was, a big barrier I see, DoD pushes for development agility with DevSecOps, but they seem to put little emphasis on good business analysis to help centralize and remediate poor systems, was the comment. Anything to add?
It's a fair observation of situations that I've seen. Absolutely. I'm not sure if there's a question that goes along with it. I mean, yes, that is something that we've seen, with existing, like with legacy systems, right? How do you get the user involved? How do you get the user involved in a meaningful way? Sometimes that's challenging. Sometimes we don't have access to them, and we have to be creative. And we have to keep in mind that the user's chain of command and the acquiring, the program office's chain of command are pretty separate, right? So
right, yeah, they don't actually meet
until very
the chief
high
of
up.
staff of the service, probably, yeah.
And so that's sort of a structural, that can be a structural impediment. But there is a lot of goodness. We work with a lot of programs that are doing some really creative things with how they engage users in that mission needs analysis or business analysis process. But it's going to be everything that we're talking about here is so context dependent. And without the luxury of a lot of things that look the same, and without the luxury of a lot of green fields, how we do that is going to vary a lot from environment to environment. And the best thing we can do is talk about how we're doing it and how we're being successful, so that folks can learn from different kinds of paradigms and different kinds of systems.
I want to respond in a slightly different way. My frustration with, we do not know how to kill things. DoD does not know how to kill a project that's gone off the rails. We don't understand sunk costs, and we think, I've already got $500 million in that. I got to give it another $500 million so they can maybe finally give me something. No, we need to put a bullet in it. I think the Army Futures Command did an interesting thing. It's funny. The Air Force has been real vocal about their transition. Navy has been pretty vocal about their transition to Agile and DevOps and modern software development. The Army's been kind of quiet, and I've been wondering what they're doing. But down at Futures Command, they took a hard look at, I'm trying to remember how many systems. This numbers could be widely wrong, but 600 different systems, and they looked at the budgets going forward, and they cut. They're making a decision to cut a third of them or something crazy, and just say, we would rather spend the right money on fewer things and get better fewer things than peanut butter spread our funding across all these systems that are going to take us decades to deliver anyway. So they're really making hard choices about what not to do in addition to what to do. And I think we need a lot more of that. I think we fund really, really exquisite things sometimes, and we could have gotten by with a whole lot less.
I guess everyone's looking for to be successful at then, but if there is no light on the tunnel, why are we going to keep money on it?
Yeah.
Well, and so sort of along with that, right, the idea that we will keep stuffing money after money we've already spent. We haven't figured out that sometimes it's okay to stop and say, you know what, that's not the right direction to go anymore, even with something that we're just building now, right? Well, we still have this. Yeah. We have this legacy of this culture where we just got to press ahead. There's one true way, and we've just got to keep going. And the whole idea of fast learning cycles and being able to say, okay, wow, that was the wrong way to go. We don't need to go that way anymore. We should invest in another way. That goes along with it.
I think we have to have the courage to start from scratch sometimes. To actually say, this system has served us well, but I can no longer modernize it. It's gotten too much technical debt built up. I have ignored it for too long. I'm not going to modernize that system, and I'm just going to let it decay in place, and I'm going to re-implement it from scratch. We really almost never do that. We have to have the courage to do that. But then we don't have the confidence that we can actually do it because we have such a terrible track record with software. So this is a cruel mistress here.
Or we can learn from our mistakes, make it better. I think we have to change the mindset of learning from mistakes and make it better.
Yeah.
The other things I'm hearing a lot is typically industry folks are talking about DevOps or DevSecOps, fail fast. And we cannot do the fail fast maybe in DoD, but we can fail in a way of programming way. On the program level, we can fail, but learn our lessons and make it better. Doesn't mean we have to fail on the production environment. Doesn't mean when we are launching a missile or anything else, we're going to fail at the moment. No, we have failed in the project. Let's learn from our project.
Yeah, there was an interesting point made by, where's my flyer?
Right
Did
here.
you steal my flyer?
Yes.
Oh. So there was a cool point made today by Bruce. Is it Bruce? No, Paul Bruce, yeah. Paul Bruce on one of his slides that in order to actually do root cause analysis and be able to solve hard problems, when you're in a failure mode, you have to have you have to be able to do blameless triage. You can't be looking to pin blame on individuals. You have to figure out what the root cause for the problem was, or you can't fix it. And I think we need to embrace that a lot more. A friend of mine told me this adage, and I saw it also on an interesting webcast I saw, that if somebody that works for you makes a mistake, even if it's a terrible mistake, try to put yourself in their shoes and say, given the information and the circumstances they were in, could I have easily made that same mistake? If you could have, it doesn't do you any good to yell at the individual that made the mistake. You need to help create a condition where that mistake gets avoided in the future. And so I think that's one of the areas we need to do better about. We talk a lot about chain of command and accountability, and those things are all very important. But when we're developing technology, we need to be able to we're trying to solve really hard problems, and we need to be able to get to the right answers without blaming individuals.
We need to be able to talk about accountability not as a single chokeable neck. Right? We hear that a lot in the DoD. Who's the single chokeable neck?
I see your hand like this, ready to choke a neck. Yeah.
And getting away from that sort of colloquial definition of accountability is something that's necessary to enable a rapid learning.
Right.
And that's actually part of DoD culture for other probably defendable good reasons, because in some circumstances you might need a single chokeable neck, but not when you're trying to solve hard problems with technology.
Yep. So we have almost 4 minutes to left. I'm going to start from the Nick, and what I would like to hear from all the panelists, and give us an advice, maybe 1 or 2 or 3, whatever you're thinking with DevSecOps concept, and we will put our program or our thought, our changing mindset. So I'm going to start from Nick. Any advice you can make us, maybe 2 or 3 advice for next week or the following week that people implemented? Like a short-term advice.
So small advice,
Yes.
short things, I guess, for next week. Okay. Well, I think, if you want to look at simple things, I think you need to take a deeper look at the cyber side of the house. If you're just doing static and dynamic analysis in your pipeline, you are not doing DevSecOps. So I recommend looking into Cycle containers and what you can do with runtime security, container security tools like, Twist or Concord, Claire, to do that runtime side of the house and not just the static side of the house during your build. Additionally, in terms of training, I think it's very important that people realize that we live in a world that's changing every 6 months, and I think the answer is not going to be coming from university that just can't keep up, unfortunately, with technology in terms of their training. And so we need to find a way to enable people to self-learn, and that could be through proper curriculum updated rapidly by the same universities, assuming they can keep up with the pace of writing those curriculums. When you look at things like Istio, which is becoming the de facto standard of service mesh, I think that's one example of something that you need to pay a very close attention to and look at, how you can leverage Istio to solve a lot of your east-west traffic issues and automation. So that's a few advice right there.
Jeff, anything you want to advise?
Yeah, this is not what I was originally going to say, but I want to say one thing. We need to be able to reward people and companies for delivered value, delivered software capability and delivered value. A lot of times we try to pay a company what the software costs to produce. We don't reward them for the value we get out of it. We also have this really terrible mindset that works with individuals too, is we pay them for the hours they expend. And we pay people very similarly for the hours they expend, but not for the value that they bring. And we need to be able to reward delivered value.
Anything else you want to add, Paina?
So I think that we heard a great talk today from Summer Fowler, who's at Argo AI, and I'd like to circle back to that, which was the idea that you should think about, in whatever position you're in this environment, think about your wingspan and what it is you are trying to help the business or the mission enable. What are you trying to enable? And how do the decisions that you make in implementing technology or making choices about the actions you take in programmatic governance, how do those help you enable the mission that you're getting to? So that's my one.
It's a great advice. And before closing that, I would like to advise the people understanding, as you said, mission, and also understand where we are in terms of the program-wise, either technical stack or architecture related, because don't jump to the right of a tool perspective. You can make mistakes. Really understand where we are. So with that, I would like to really thank everybody. It was a great talk. We cannot really solve all the challenges probably in 1 hour, but at least we have a very high-level discussion what we can do and what things can be done easily with DevSecOps concept.
Yeah, and I want to take a personal minute to thank Hassan and Nick and Eileen for all of the hard work that they do, spreading the word, and you guys are evangelists for this in a lot of programs, and so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, so we want to thank everyone for their time today. There's a couple questions we didn't get to in the comments, so I'll make sure we get them to Hassan and try to get some answers to those questions as well. So again, thanks for everyone's time. Next week will be our next webcast, and that topic is going to be what makes a good software architect, the 2019 edition. So you can sign up from the SCI website, or we will send out an email invite as well. Again, today's event was archived and will be available on our YouTube page early tomorrow morning. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.